Okay, so let's go. Welcome back to this session. So today is the coding session, our first coding session. So I will assume that everyone has completed the initiation. If you have not completed the initiation, I can see some people, don't worry, you can do it later on. And we will start the training. So for the training, we have a dedicated repository. Actually, I can copy paste the link in the chat. This repository contains the entire code for the 5 projects that we will build, as well as the daily guides that I've talked about. Everything is in this repository. Some of you, maybe you are new to GitHub. Don't worry, we won't use GitHub too much. We just need to store the files and access the files, but then we will open a coding environment. After this lecture, you can take some time to read the file. So you have all the resource, all the links here, and some explanation. And essentially, to get started, you have 2 options. You can run this repository. I don't know how I deactivate that. Whatever. You have two options. So the first one is to run this in your browser. You don't need to install anything. You just click here and follow the instructions, and then you can work from your browser. So from Google Chrome or Firefox or Brave. I don't know what you're using, but you can work from your browser. The second one is to work locally. I know some people always like to work locally. I would say in this team. If you want to work locally, you need to install the SDK on your machine. And I have made a video for that, so you can watch my previous videos and do it. It will require some setup. I would say that if you are experienced developer, you know what you're doing here, you can go for the local option. It shouldn't be too hard to install. Just one thing, if you are on Windows, you need Windows subsystem for Linux, because the SDK DFX is only compatible with Linux or macOS. You just need to take that into account. If you're not sure about how to set up locally, you can just run that from your browser. And the simple way to do that is just to click here. It opens Gitpod. So Gitpod is a tool that we will use this week. Essentially, it's an online coding environment, and we can use it to set up a workspace where we will work for the week. You don't need to change anything. So this is the repository that we open, Visual Studio Code and standard. You have 60 hours for free. So the only thing you need is a GitHub account. You need to have a GitHub account to use Gitpod. Make sure that you have already a GitHub account. If you don't have one, you can create one pretty easily on GitHub. And then just click on continue, and it's gonna open the Gitpod. Okay, so it's working perfectly today. Sometimes it can happen that the workspace loads forever. If it's the case for you, I have found 2 solutions. The first one is to go in incognito mode. It always works. The second one is to delete your history, reset your cache, and all settings. Sometimes it cleans up the setting and it works. And also, you can also try to change the browser. I know that I never have any issue with Firefox, but I don't use Firefox on a daily basis. So yeah, but it should work pretty easily in most of the cases. So essentially, it's gonna install everything. So extension, Motoko extension, and DFX for you. As you can see here, you can just run clear to clear the terminal. Then you can zoom in a bit if you want, and you can get started to work like this. Now we are set up. So I want to explain a little bit the different folders that we have. The first one are the assets. So it contains some images. You don't need to take a look at it. It's only useful for the referencing those assets, but you don't need to look into that. You have the days. So the days will be, the folder called days will be super useful because for each day of the bootcamp, you have a specific folder that you need to take a look at. So today it's day 1. We will take a look at that later on. Then you have lessons. Lessons, you can take a look at the chapters. So essentially those are documentation and lessons for Motoko. You can take a look, for example, at the chapter 1. Open that. And you have explanation about canisters, WebAssembly, Motoko language. You have 13 chapters in total. And you can read all of them. It should take around like between 10 to 20 minutes to read each chapter. And then you have the test. And the test, you don't need to look inside of it. It's not something that you need to touch. For the rest, the only file that you need to touch, and you just need to understand it, you don't need to really touch it, it's the dfx.json. So we will use the dfx tool during this week. And dfx has a configuration file, which is called dfx.json. This is the file that you see here. Essentially, you specify your canisters, the path to your canisters, so where your Motoko files are located, and you can use that to deploy your canisters. So to sum it up, you just need to care about the days and the dfx.json. The rest is just configuration file for me and some tests and some asset and so on. Once you are inside the day 1, you have a README file. So the README file, you can open it, and then I recommend to, let me show you, to click here. It's going to open it again, but this time with a better format, because right now here it's Markdown. And so you can have this preview where it's nicely formatted. And this is the daily guide that I was talking about in the presentation. If you remember, those are the daily guides where you have all the lectures of today, the resource. So this is like a summary of everything that we are doing today. Some of the concept that we are touching on today, some information. You have like Motoko pill. So every day you will learn something about Motoko, and a meme for every day as well. So that's the README. And then the project is in projects. You also have a Markdown file that you can open. So project.markdown. And a Motoko file. This is where we will code. The Motoko file, for each day, you have a project with a different Motoko file. So day 3, you have a different Motoko file, day 4, and so on. Okay. And so for today, we are doing the coding session. Oops. Essentially, what you need to do is open your project.markdown on the right and your main.motoko on the left, or the opposite if you want. Then you can close the rest. So if you are not familiar with Visual Studio Code, the shortcut that I have is Control B or Command B to close the side explorer, and then Control G to close the terminal. Now we can open that, and we can start the project number 1. So every project has a little context associated with it. So there is a story about you and your journey at the Motoko Academy. So you can read about it. It's a quick story that explains why you need to build this project. And then the mission, so this is your task for today, the requirements, and the task that you have for today. So for example, let's say I want to start project number 1. I'm gonna read the story. So welcome to the Motoko Academy. We are thrilled to have you here. As you stand at the entrance, a large luminous hologram greets you. Behind the glow of the hologram, the large hall opens up, filled with energy and innovation. So that's the school. You first notice the screens filled with lines of code. It's not just display. You can see a lot of projects with new technologies and systems. So you can see that this is a place to grow, discover, and connect. You're lost in your thoughts, and there is a hologram that reach out to you and ask you, what is your dream? So today, this is the foundation for the DAO that you're going to build. And it's important that you grow a vision for where you want the DAO to grow and what kind of problems, what kind of projects the DAO is about. Then this is more concretely what you need to build. If you want to embark on this journey, you need to set a direction for your DAO. A strong foundation is key to creating a DAO, and it starts with a clear and well-defined dream or vision. So what changes do you want to see? What is your personal vision for the future? A question that I really like is, if you had unlimited resource, what would you be passionate about doing? If you had the backing of a community, what kind of project or initiative would you like to undertake? Today, we are going to define the name of our DAO, the mission of our DAO, and the goals of our DAO. Don't confuse the mission for the goals, because it's not exactly the same. The mission is the end goal of your DAO, like let's say in 10 years. And the goals is, how do you achieve this mission? So it will be more concrete, you know. A goal is going to be very defined and precise objective. And we are implementing all of this in Motoko, in our canister directly, that we are going to write here. Okay, so now I have understood the context of my project. Maybe it's a little bit confusing in the beginning because it's the first project that we are doing like this. So you can take more time to read and understand. Then you have a list of tasks. So this is what you will need to do today. And at the end, you need to make sure that you follow this interface. And this will be the case for every of the 5 projects of the training. You have a well-defined interface with the functions. So get name, get manifesto, set manifesto, add goals, get goals. Essentially, that's the function that you can see here as well. So get name, get manifesto, set manifesto, add goal, get goals. It's very important that you respect the names and the types of this function. If you change the types, your project will never be accepted by the dashboard. So for example, if you do, let's say I don't want to call it get name, but get or query, I want to change it to query name. If you do that, your project will never be accepted. Even if it's correctly implemented and so on, it won't work. So make sure to respect the function names and respect the types as well. For example, if you change this to a natural number instead of a text, it's also going to fail to be submitted on the dashboard. Okay, so let's say I would like to do task number 1, define an immutable variable. This is something that we've already done. And so I know that to define an immutable variable in Motoko, it's going to be let name of type text is equal to the name of my DAO. And I'll go with classic Motoko Bootcamp DAO. And that's it. I have done task number 1. I'm not going to go more into details. You have task number 2, task number 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Once you're done, you can deploy your canister and submit it on the dashboard. I'll give you 20 minutes to do that. I just want to make sure before we start that everyone is on board, so that everyone is at least at this point with me, following the Visual Studio Code setup. How to manage identity? Yeah, managing identity is going to be a challenge with the Gitpod. So if you are looking to build after the bootcamp, if you are looking to go beyond, you will need to set up the local environment, because every time we are creating a new workspace, we will have a new DFX identity. So we cannot really store cycles. We cannot store cycles are the credits that we will use. We cannot store ICPs. It's going to be a problem as we become more experienced developers. For the bootcamp, especially for the training phase, it's not a problem because we will always deploy in the playground, and the playground is free, so we don't really need to store any money or to pay for anything. And that's why we are using the Git pod. But if you want to do it locally, again, this is also an option that is open to you. What should I press on GitHub? So this button, open in Gitpod. It says 10 hours per month. I need to check that. I thought it was 60 hours. 10 hours can be, I mean, 10 hours should be enough, but can be, yeah, it can be complex if you need more time. I'll check soon. I was pretty sure it was 10 hours, 60 hours per month. Free. 50 if you add LinkedIn. Oh, okay. So I think they changed it because it was not like this before. Which editor to choose? VS Code is the best option. VS Code browser, yeah. If you already use your time limit, I guess you can do it locally, yeah. I get this error, an unexpected error occurred that requires a reload of this page. Yes, so this is the issue that you can face sometimes. So I've already talked about that. You can try to switch to another browser. So if you're using Chrome, try Firefox. If you're using Firefox, try Chrome. If you're using Brave, try another one. You can empty your cache, sorry, and do hard reset of the page. And finally, I've noticed that it always works in incognito mode. So in the last case, last resort, you can use incognito mode. It always works. I'm not sure exactly why. And it's super annoying because this error, I've been in contact with Gitpod and I just don't see any way to, like, sometimes it happens and I'm not sure exactly why. So it's a little bit frustrating and I'm sorry about that if it's also frustrating for you. But you will make it. Can I submit this tomorrow? Yes, so you can submit this at any point on the dashboard. It's always open. You're stuck at the border. Yeah, okay, got it. Where do I write my code? Okay, so once you are open, you can write it in the main.motoko. Okay, so most of you are set up. I'm hoping now by this point. If that's the case, I will start a 20 minutes timer. No, I think 25 minutes is better. Well, 20 minutes. Let's start with 20 minutes and we will see that later. 20 minutes for you to complete this project. After that, I will correct it. So I'll try to explain how I would do it. And if you have any question, I'm here and monitoring the chat. Good luck, everyone, and see you in 20 minutes. Okay, so it's time for me to correct. Well, before that, I want to say that it's might look difficult to some of you because we haven't had time to go into all concepts and how to import modules, for example. I've seen that, how to define a function. We haven't seen a lot. And also it's a very short amount of time, 20 minutes, especially if you are just starting out now. 20 minutes should be enough if you had time to read all the chapters and all the instructions that are specified in the project. You have all those links. If you had time to read all of this, it would have been enough, you know. But I can understand that it sounds difficult. But don't worry, I'm going to correct it now, and it's not as difficult as it sounds. Once you will see the code, I think it will be much clearer for you. So let's go. The first thing is to define a mutable variable, because we have already done task number 1, so we will move directly to the task number 2. This variable is called manifesto, and it represents the manifesto of our DAO. So the manifesto is this idea of the goal that can be political or not, but it's essentially the public intentions of our DAO. And so for the Motoko Bootcamp DAO, we want to empower the next generation of builders to make the DAO evolution a reality. So let's say this is our manifesto. And then we need to implement getName, which is a query function. Again, a query function is a function that does not go through consensus, and it's answered by a single node, so it's really fast. A query function is used when you just want to read something. So getName and getManifesto are very good example of what a query function can be used for. In that case, we can return the name, and that's how you would do it, and return the manifesto. So right now, not too complex. This is what we've already seen before, and if you have done the initiation, you are familiar with what we've just done, because this is something we've already done a few times now. Okay, now starts the more complex part. Implement the set manifesto function. So set manifesto, well, actually set manifesto, we have already seen how to do that in the initiation. We will just do manifesto is assigned to new manifesto, and then we can return. Now, task number 6, 7, and 8, we need to define a mutable variable goals of type buffer text, which will store the goals of our DAO. So this is a new concept, this concept of buffer, and this can be difficult. The buffer is an object in Motoko, and we can actually have a look at the buffer library. So let me show you the buffer Motoko. This is the documentation from internetcomputer.org, which is the official website of the Internet Computer. And we have what's called as the Motoko base library. It contains functions and modules that we use with the Motoko language. So those are basic one, I would say, for basic data structures like array, Boolean, buffer, character, and a lot of them. So you don't need to look at all of them today, but at some point, you probably will use some of them. And so the one that we are interested in today is this buffer module. A buffer is an element that we can add other elements inside. So you can think of it like an array. If you are familiar with an array, you can think of it like this, but a buffer is much better in Motoko to add elements. So if you want to add elements to a data structure, the buffer is the way to go. It's a simple one. You just add elements, and then you can return the elements at any point. So for every module that we have this documentation page, and you have every piece of information that you need. What I mean by that is that you have the syntax on how to declare a buffer. You have the syntax and all the functions that you can use on a buffer. So for example, you can see buffer.add is going to add an element. Buffer.size will give you how many elements inside the buffer. buffer.get enables you to access element inside the buffer, and so on. To import a module from the base library, we need to use this syntax. So import the name of the module, so in our case, buffer, then Motoko base / buffer. And this syntax, you will use it a lot. So this is the first time we are using it, but you will use it a lot because if you want to import an array, for the array module, for example, it's exactly the same syntax. We also have the text module. So for example, import text. I think you've understood what I mean. So this is the syntax to import module from the base library. Just a side note, we can import modules from other places. Like the base library is most of the modules that we will use this week because it contains the basic of the language. But if you go into more advanced Motoko development, you can import modules from other repository, from your own code, and so on. So I just need buffer, and now I can define my buffer. To define a buffer, we can take a look at the documentation, and this is specified here. Let buffer is equal buffer.buffer, not 3. Okay, what does it mean? It can be confusing, especially if it's your early days with Motoko. This can be very confusing syntax. Actually, for me, it was very confusing. And I will break it down very simply. So variable goals, this is the name for our buffer, is equal buffer.buffer text 0. So this is how I'm going to do task number 6. Here, buffer.buffer means that we are importing the class buffer from the buffer module. So this is a module, but in the module, you have a class that is defined. And so I want to import this class. So buffer.buffer, I import the class. And that's why I need 2 buffers, sorry. Then you need to specify the types of the element that you want inside the buffer. So Motoko being a very typed language, when you define a buffer, you cannot, you need to be precise on the type that you want inside the buffer. So you can have a buffer that stores natural number, text, Boolean, character, any types that you want. We could have it here, like for example, nat. But you need to specify it at the moment you instantiate your buffer. And so in our case, we want a buffer that stores text because we want the goals to be just pieces of text. So that's why I need this text here. And then the number that we have specifies the initial capacity, as you can see here. The initial capacity means how many elements can you add inside the buffer. If you take a look at this documentation, you will essentially, it explains how the buffer are implemented. You don't need to worry about how some data structures are implemented, at least in the early days. This is not so important, but you can look at it. Essentially, it's implemented using a combination of array, and there is a capacity of the buffer, but the capacity actually, it grows automatically. So when you add elements, the underlying arrays, but are going to grow automatically for you. So this initial capacity, this is a personal choice. I always put 0 because it's always going to grow. The only case where you would set an initial value is if you know that you are going to have like 1,000 elements in the buffer from the beginning. In that case, it would be smart to start with 1,000 instead of 0 because, of course, the initial capacity, when it changes, it's doing some operation because it's growing an array behind the scenes. And so if you really want to be like cautious about it and you have a lot of elements at the beginning, you can set the initial capacity to how many elements you want to initialize your buffer with. But in my case, I don't have any elements right now. So I'm gonna set 0 and it's going to grow automatically. It's fine. So that's the task number 6. I've defined my data structure. Now, how do I use it? How do I add element inside of it? This is our next function. We need to implement the add goal function. And this function takes a goal which is a text. So here, our new goal, adds the goal to the buffer and returns nothing. So it looks similar to this function, but instead of changing a variable, we want to add something into a buffer. And now, if you take a look at the buffer documentation, you don't need to go very far. It's the second function in the list. You have this add function, which add an element to the end of the buffer. And so let's just see how we can use it. Buffer.add. Okay. So I'm going to do similar goals.add, new goal, and that's it. So that's it. We have used our buffer. And every time we call this function, it's going to add a goal inside our buffer. Note that this function is changing the state of the canister. And so this one needs to be an update function, not a query function. Okay, so that's the task number 7. Now the task number 8 is to implement the get goals query function. This function takes no parameter and returns the goals of our DAO in an array. To do that, we need to convert our buffer to an array. So this is how you specify an array in Motoko. And now, why do we need to do that? This is something I'm gonna explain many times because it needs to be really well understood, but I will start with a first explanation, and don't worry if you don't get all the explanation right now. So why don't we just do this? Why don't we just share the buffer outside of the array, outside of the function? Why do we need to convert it to an array? If you look at this, I have not even implemented the function. I already have an error from Motoko that says shared function as non-shared return type, buffer, and then it specifies all the functions in the buffer. Type buffer is or contain non-shared type. So there is a concept in Motoko of shared types or non-shared types. Some types can be shared, other types cannot be shared. If a type cannot be shared, it's forbidden to use it as the return argument of a function, a return value as a function. Why? Because a buffer is a class. So imagine that you share your buffer to the outside world, to another user or to another canister. Then anyone that has this buffer is able to call .add, .get, .clear. So essentially anyone would be able to modify your buffer. If you do that, then you're going to have your variable here that is manipulated by many canisters, many users, and you just don't know who is adding elements, when, why, and you have no control over your code. So if it would be possible, it would be a mess for Motoko developers, and in general on the IC would be a mess to deal with that. So that's why we have this concept of shared type and non-shareable types. It's actually a concept that is not limited to Motoko. It's everywhere on the IC. Like some data structures cannot be shared. And that's why you need to convert it to an array. Essentially, you take your buffer, you do a snapshot of what's inside the buffer, and you share that. So you are not sharing the variable, you are sharing the content of the variable. And that's a big difference because the person receiving the information is not able to modify, add goals, for example, inside the buffer. To do that, so let's get back to our array. To do that, we also need to take a look at the buffer library. And there is a method which is, I agree, it's quite far in the list of methods. So it's not so easy to find, but there is a method called toArray, which essentially creates an array from a buffer. So this is buffer.toArray, and then the buffer that you want to convert to an array, and it's gonna generate an array for you. So return buffer.toArray. We can put some parentheses here. Goals. And that's it. I have converted my buffer to an array. Now, next step, I've done all my goals for today. So I'm probably done with this project. The next step is to deploy on the playgrounds. So you remember the Motoko playground that we've used. We can actually deploy on the playground, but without using the Motoko playground. So the Motoko playground is just an interface. Today we are using Visual Studio Code because we need that, and we will do that in the next few days, but we can still deploy on the playground. The playground is on the mainnet, so it's actually on the internet computer, but it's a place where you can deploy for free. And so to do that, we will use DFX. So DFX is this tool that I'm using right now. It's already installed on your workspace. DFX deploy playground, and then the name of the project that you want to deploy. And this comes from here. So if you look at dfx.json, you have project 1. This is the name of our canister. And you can deploy like this. So you will see that this is the, it's showing my identity because this is the first time I'm using this identity. So it's my seed phrase. Well, I don't really care because I'm not planning to use this identity in the future. You have a warning message. Don't worry about that. It's just something from the base library. It's not a problem. And now we have our canister that is already deployed. We can click here, open, and we have access to the Candid UI, which we can use to interact with our canister. So I can see all the methods that I've implemented. For example, get goals, right now it's empty. Get name, Motoko Bootcamp DAO, get manifesto. That's good. And I can try my function add goals. So let's say finish project 1. So I call that, then graduates from Motoko Bootcamp. And now if I look inside of this, I can see my 2 goals coming up here. So it seems to work. Now, how do you submit that on the dashboard? You just need to take your canister ID. So the canister ID is here. You have it here, this one. Take this one, copy paste, and then you go on the dashboard as usual, submit section. So probably need to refresh, submit training, and then, well, project 1. If for tomorrow, I guess you understand that it's going to be project 2, project 3, project 4, and so on. So to review what we've done today, we have imported our first module. So this is the first time we are using some module code from the base library. This is something we will do a lot in the future, in the next few days. So you will discover different data structures, different types that we can use in Motoko. We have implemented a buffer. This is something that we will use again in the future because this is a great data structure to add elements simply and just, store a few elements. And yeah, then we've converted our buffer to an array by using buffer.toArray. Then we've deployed on the playground. So I can see a few people asking how to use DFX. DFX deploy playground. So DFX deploy playground and then project 1. In case you're wondering, how do I deploy not on the playground? If you want to deploy on the IC, but we cannot do it because we will need to pay for it, and I haven't set up any cycle, any credit, so it wouldn't work, but the command would be just this one. So DFX deploy network IC. And if you want to deploy locally, so you can start a local replica, I will explain that in the next session, how to do it. A local replica is good if you want to work locally, so on your machine. You can just do DFX deploy, and it's going to deploy on your local replica. The problem with the local replica is that you cannot submit your project on the dashboard because the dashboard is on the IC, and essentially it cannot communicate with your canister that if you deploy like this would be on your local replica. So we have 3 ways to deploy. We can deploy locally, on the playground, on the IC. And for the training, I recommend to deploy on the playground because it's free and it works on the dashboard, so it's great. Okay, so this is recorded, of course, and I will share the recordings. Also, if you look at the dashboard, you have this training, project one. This is project one, and this is actually corrected. So what I've done is also in this video. You can take a look. There are some explanation, I think, a bit more in the video as well. And yeah, that's it for the project number one. Don't worry if you haven't done it today, and if you just copy paste what I do, because it's normal. We are just starting out, and it's meant to be like this. Yeah, we are on time, so we need to move to the next session. The next session is about DFX, so that's a great transition. I will show you what is DFX, how you can use it, and even like all the commands that exist with DFX. We need to move the Zoom to the next one. So thanks for following, and see you in the next session, guys.